good morning to you. We are in the morning hours doing a pre-record. We are coming to you live from the beautiful city of New Orleans in Louisiana at the United Public Radio Network at 107.7 FM and the UFO Paranormal Radio Network at 105.3 FM. We're on Facebook, we're on Roku, we're on Rumble, and we are on YouTube. We're having a wonderful day at the Light Gate. I want to thank our sponsor for our network, Carnation. We love you very much. Thank you so much. Just want to tell you all that this is something that I use all the time. I use every one of their products. I trust them. It's awesome. All right. So this being a pre-record, I'm just going to hand over to Preston and let's go.
Thank you, Dolly. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight. I know I usually like to say hello to all you folks in chat, but yes, this is a pre-record, and I keep getting in trouble for spending too much time saying hello to you guys. So just know that we love you, and thank you very much for joining us for episode 126 of The Light Gate. We're moving along. I, of course, am your host, Preston Dennett, and my lovely co-host is Dolly Safran. We are super excited about our show today. When I saw this person's book, I just could not wait to have her on. Our guest tonight is Linda C. Powell, and she has written this amazing book called Against the Odds. Here, let me see if I can get that a little bit larger for you. This is a groundbreaking book. It really is. This is such a comprehensive and eye-opening, amazing book that I think everyone who's interested in this subject should read, because it outlines really the whole life story of one of the most towering figures in the UFO field. He's absolutely my hero, Donald Keyhoe. We wouldn't be where we are today if not for him. So this is going to be all kinds of fun. Let me just tell you a little bit about our guest. Again, her name is Linda C. Powell, and we are honored and delighted to welcome her. Linda is an English writer with a decades-long interest in mid-20th century America, and since 2015, she has been a news editor for The Anomalist. Her landmark book, Against the Odds, Major Donald E. Keyhoe and His Battle to End UFO Secrecy, is the first biography of one of the most important figures in UFO history. In this book, Donald Keyhoe, his public and private life before and during his time as the world's best-known UFO advocate, is revealed. Linda not only profiles Keyhoe's amazing and pioneering research, but reveals a behind-the-scenes look at UFO politics and how the U.S. government has attempted to perpetrate a UFO cover-up on the American people. This book has been very well received. Leslie Kean, another very well-known figure in this field, calls this book, quote, fascinating and inspiring. Jeffrey Mishlove, also quite well-known, calls it, quote, the most well-researched book in the UFO field that I've ever seen. That's high praise, and it's absolutely deserved. Linda lives near England's East Coast and holds a Bachelor of Science degree in psychology. You can find a link to find out more about this book in the show notes. But without further ado, let's just bring on our esteemed guest.
Hi, welcome, Linda. Hi. Thank you for coming on with us. I just want to say something up front. I didn't read the book all the way through. I went through it in my fashion. And I want to tell you the things that jumped out at me about this book is how comprehensive you are to details, how immaculate your walk through this man's life is. It is incredible. The amount of research you must have done was incredible. I'm so impressed. I don't see many authors in the world, even today, who are capable of that kind of detail. And I just want to thank you for putting this book out, because it shows exactly what we've been trying to explain to people, that the government has literally interfered with every aspect of this subject and continues to do so today in a myriad of ways. And I feel really sorry for Donald Keyhoe. I almost cried about it at the end of the book, because what he went through, oh my heaven, it's just incredible.
Yeah. Yes, he was certainly committed in every respect, from from a personal mission, if you like, to find out, even to the point of sacrificing his family life in some respects. So it was a burden on him, but he couldn't resist it, I'm afraid.
Yeah, well, I know that feeling. Once I found out about this subject, I realized how crucially important it is that people know the truth. And yeah, I absolutely adore Donald Keyhoe. I've got all his books. They are absolute required reading, and I've always been very interested in this man. And yet, there's no one ever wrote anything about him. So
no, that's surprising to me. That very much surprised me. So I thought it was about time.
Yeah, absolutely riveting book you've put together. Very well written, and like Dolly says, so comprehensive. I absolutely enjoyed it. I read it from cover to cover, and even though I've been in this field for almost 40 years now, I learned a lot. About like Ed Ruppelt. I'm like, wow, did not know about that. Or Delmer Farney, I think I'm pronouncing that right.
Yes.
And Albert Chopp and all these major figures in this field. I'm like, wow. And of course, all the major incidents from, the Capitol flyover in '52 and Conning Committee and the story behind NICAP. I mean, there's so much to this book. But before we dive into it, as I warned you before the show, I always like to ask guests, what were they like as little kids? Did they believe in UFOs? Have they had an encounter? Really, what brought you to, what inspired you to write this book?
As a child, I don't think I'd even heard of UFOs. But then when I got into my teens, I heard about George Adamski. He was covered in one of the Sunday trash rags. But I believed it when I was a teenager. I thought this was fascinating. And as a result, I thought in the following years that everyone who was interested in the subject was like Adamski. They'd all popped over to Venus in a flying saucer and had a nice spot of lunch with Venusians and that sort of thing. And I've always been curious about whether or not we have visitors from other worlds. But it wasn't until, I think it was probably 2011 or 12, and I was recovering from a very serious illness and consequently was watching a lot of TV and saw an interview with Bob Lazar, who I'd never heard of. And I was surprised to find that he was quite serious and not making outlandish claims. And so I was very curious, looked him up, and then that opened up the whole rabbit hole of the UFO world. And wherever I looked, I found Donald Keyhoe. So it became clear that this was a very important man. And I was curious how he'd gone from being a small town, if you like, Midwest chap, through being a Marine, flying with Lindbergh, a pulp writer, and then suddenly he's head of NICAP. So I was very curious about how this had happened, and thought, well, I'll read a biography of him, and then found that no one had done one. So all those things together, with my increasing curiosity about the UFO subject, that's what got me going, really.
Wow. Well, I'm so glad you did, because you're really filling a niche here that has been left wide open. Yeah, because I've always wondered about Keyhoe. He's really the first author of any influence in this field.
Yes.
His books, which of course, if you see the bookcase behind me, I have all of them. I always recommend them, especially to people who are skeptical or beginners in this field, because he was really, the first to not only document this, but really the first to say, hey, you know what? I think there's a cover-up going on here. So what a fascinating story. I guess we'll just start at the beginning. Like you mentioned, he came from a pretty well-to-do family, I understand.
They were not wealthy, but they were very comfortable, certainly, and they had some local influence in his hometown of Ottumwa in Iowa. So he had a very good upbringing, very secure, as far as I could determine it. Good parents, a good social crowd. So he got a good start in life, certainly, yes.
And then he joined the Marines.
Yes, in 1916 or 17. I should remember this, but I can't quite now. He went off to Annapolis and passed the exams to get in and did well when he was there. And I was able to reference some of that material from online sources which cover Annapolis history and the yearbooks relating to Don Keyhoe. So that gave me some insight into the kind of young man that he was. He was a bit pugnacious. He would get into fights and black eyes here and there. Even at school, he was the same. But he was otherwise quite civilized. It was just I think it was a young man's thing. And he went with it.
Yeah, that was actually really interesting to hear about, because it sort of sets the stage as to, his personality and how he became, such a fighter for,
Yeah, I think that's a good point. You make a good point there, because I think if he'd not been of a how can I put it, some slightly confrontational character, I don't think he could have withstood a great deal of what was to come later on that was so challenging and at times devastating for him. So I think he had to have the grit and the resolve and the I believe you said chutzpah in him, and he seemed to have that, certainly. So we can see where that comes from.
Yeah, well, I loved how you profiled his early life. There's a lot of humor in the book, and also some harrowing stuff. I mean, he had a pretty serious airplane accident at one point.
Yes, that must have been terrifying for him. Of course, this is in the very early days of flight, and he was there at the time. And when he took up that enormous plane, made of wood and wire, and then crashed into the Pacific in the dark, I would have thought that would be enough to put anyone off doing anything forever. But he just coped with it, and this is in the days, of course, before penicillin, and his injury was potentially fatal. And he had a 5-week journey back to America by boat. And then he was in and out of hospital for a few years, and it troubled him right up to the end of his life. But he somehow just dealt with it and got on with it. Very tough, really.
Yeah, that one really kind of made me think, because it was that close to,
indeed.
Him not being able to.
The end for Don Kean.
Which was so interesting to me, because he had such a powerful influence on this field, and to know all these circumstances that lead up to it, it's like, wow, there must have been guidance there, honestly.
Possibly.
And also so interesting is, of course, his relationship to Charles Lindbergh. I love that part of the book as well. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I could have written more on that, but it would have ended up being a book about Lindbergh and Keyhoe. Much of the material there came from Don's own account in his own book, Flying with Lindbergh. And I was able to source a lot of newspaper and magazine material. And so that fleshed it out. And it struck me that he went from being one of the chaps in the Department of Commerce, where he'd gone after he had to retire from service, to being in this very privileged position. I think I describe him as being chosen above all men in America to accompany Lindbergh, who at that time was the biggest name on the planet, I think, if you exclude royalty and the likes. So this is a tremendous privilege and unique, because prior to that, there had been no similar flights attempted, and America was trying to develop aviation with Lindbergh's reputation and sheer nerve, frankly, to to promote that. So it's quite a coup for Keyhoe to get offered that position, and he felt the honour of that for the rest of his life. He was greatly influenced by it, I think, and he admired Lindbergh enormously.
He was quite a prankster too. I did not know that.
Yeah, I find that a bit disturbing, really, because I had read from other sources occasions that Lindbergh's pranks were not really amusing, that they were quite cruel, and that was how I felt they were, given what Keyhoe wrote about his first-hand experience. And of course, we know now what we didn't know then, that Lindbergh had this whole other rather unsavory side to him in terms of his personal values, with the children that he fathered on other women. And so it makes one reevaluate his behaviour at the time with Keyhoe. Was this a fundamentally cruel and self-serving man, or was he, as Keyhoe perceived him, a merry sort of fellow who just liked to play jokes on his friends? I'm not convinced by that. I think Lindbergh was perhaps rather cruel, but everyone will have their own opinion on that, I suppose. But I did want to bring that out because I felt it was important, and not least to show Keyhoe's admiration of Lindbergh in spite of the things that he did to him and to others. He was absolutely devoted to him. I don't think anything Lindbergh could have done would have changed Don's mind.
That's an interesting take on that, because Lindbergh has always interested me my whole life. And one of the things that I found interesting about him, and that he was probably a covert narcissist. And his actions spoke wildly of that. They point to it. And there aren't many people who can deal with covert narcissists. And when I was starting to think about Keyhoe and his relationship with him, and the fact that they got along so well, there had to be an agreement between the two of them to put up with each other. Because Lindbergh would, as a narcissist will, use people to their own, their own needs, and it's covering up their inability to be. They have no real. How do I put this? This is a word I'm looking for. They don't have a lot of their own self-esteem at all. They build off of others, and Keyhoe had to represent that to him. Keyhoe is one heck of a guy for Lindbergh to put, want him in his service like that. Okay. He also recognized in him an ability that he coveted as well. And when you look at Keyhoe, and then now that I know more about Keyhoe, I think that Lindbergh knew that about him. He wanted that, tremendously wanted it, because it built him up, tremendously built him up. And I think Lindbergh walked a fine line with Keyhoe and made Keyhoe believe it was all pranks and fun and joy. And that's why Keyhoe perceived him that way and nobody else. See what I'm saying? I think
you're in the ballpark there. My feeling was that I think Keyhoe was rather dazzled by Lindbergh and probably overlooked a lot of things.
Yes, that too. Absolutely. I think about both ways. Yeah.
Strongly, yeah, I think he did, because Lindbergh dazzled everyone. And to be with him, and Keyhoe felt he was his friend. I don't think he was his friend.
I don't either.
No, you're right. I think he did use people, and that became evident in his later years. But yeah, Keyhoe, he chose to interpret things that way. In a sense, I think I get it to some extent, because if we try and put ourselves into the position of finding that we're keeping intimate company with somebody who's super famous, you're going to overlook a lot of things. You're going to interpret things to suit a more favourable view, and I think that played into it. It was a celebrity glamour as much as... And we did admire him because Lindbergh had achieved things, and he'd been... I describe him, I think, as having a nerveless self-confidence. He could do things that other people would just never contemplate. That impressed Keyhoe, I think, as a
Yes.
flyer. And Keyhoe never fulfilled his ambition, but he was very impressed by aviation matters, and someone who'd achieved a great deal was going to impress him even more.
Yes.
It's funny, there's a saying, never meet your heroes, because suddenly you realize they're not who you thought they were. And I was a little nervous, picking up this book. I'm like, oh, please let Keyhoe be a good man. And I was delighted to see that he was very self-effacing, humble, and hardworking. And
I would say so. Yeah. I mean, there were things that, small things that came through in the research that suggested he was intolerant at times. Gordon Law, who was assistant director for some time, and I had personal contact with Gordon during the research. He was tremendously fond of Keyhoe, but he said that he would sack somebody in a moment, and yet other people he would tolerate beyond what you would expect him to do. So I don't think he ever quite pinned him down. But yes, I think on the whole, he was very hardworking, perhaps overly committed person where UFOs are concerned. And if he believed something was right, he would absolutely go at it like a dog with a bone. In the book, you will have read some of the personal letters in which he expresses regret for having put his family through very difficult times. But he still didn't give it up. He just kept going with it. So maybe there's a little bit of dysfunction there within himself, that he wasn't able to draw the line and say family first. It was UFOs first, except in extremes when his wife was ill, for example.
Well, it must have been very frustrating for him, because like the title of the book so aptly puts it, he is fighting such a monumental thing here. So it must be incredibly frustrating.
Very strongly. I was surprised when I started the research just how many difficulties he had. I knew that the Air Force was always against him, and that he was ridiculed and so forth. That was pretty much what I knew. But when I dug into the correspondence and some of the other documents, I was really surprised just how much he had to contend with. And yet he did it. He just dug his heels in and would not be deflected, no matter how much he was taken to task over it. The press had a good go at him. The Air Force made his life miserable when they could. So he faced, he was really against the odds. That was what kept coming up to me as I was writing. He's working against the odds all the time. And in the end, he didn't win, unfortunately. But it's still, right up to virtually the last months or a couple of years of his life, he was still going at it. So
I have a feeling he won a little bit because we're talking about him right now and what he went through. I want to give him credit for that.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, one of the titles I considered for the book, which among many, was The Forgotten Father of Ufology, because it came across to me that's what he was. He's not as well known now as he might have been, say, 20 years ago. But he really did kick-start it.
Yes.
And he started from a position somewhat behind, because the subject had already acquired a bit of ridicule before he got involved. And that just mounted and mounted with a damn scheme.
Yeah. Right. I have a feeling that his intuition was mighty, because he in essence was flying under their radar. Okay. That's why he was able to put out what he was, even though they were complaining. It was hard for them to keep up with what he was doing, I think, because he was presenting stuff, and I think it's a simple, I think it's happening today as well with his books and what he left behind for us all to discover, that he's still sliding under the radar somewhat. You can't suppress somebody who doesn't want to be suppressed. You can't suppress truth at all. And I think that was his main goal. You know, you wrote that eloquently throughout the whole book, that truth was his beacon. You know, literally, that's what he followed, and it obsessed him to tell the truth. And I'm real impressed with that, just saying. You know, it's amazing.
So here's where something that's really interesting. You know, so the UFOs start appearing in large numbers. We have Kenneth Arnold sighting and Roswell and the whole wave of 1947. And he doesn't believe in UFOs at all, and doesn't want to write about them. I laughed out loud when I read that part about how he got involved, because he was not going to look into this subject.
That's right, yes. He was already very wary about the ridicule involved. And then, of course, once he felt there was a real story behind this, I wasn't able to find out what the research was that he did for True magazine, which was the start of his career in the UFO world. But he obviously found things that absolutely convinced him. And that did it for him. He realized, or he believed, that's what the truth is. We've all got to find out about this. And he just went for it 100%.
Yeah, but what made me kind of laugh out loud was he was asked to write this article for True magazine, which of course changed everything. And he didn't want to do it. And his editor is like, well, you know what? You don't do it, you're out.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, because I was surprised to learn that myself. That came to me from, it originated from Lee Munzik, who was head of the New Jersey UFO group, I think I've got that correct, and worked with Keyhoe. And he was interviewed by someone who passed that interview to me. I was very surprised by that. But it kind of fits that Keyhoe wouldn't have been impressed at stories of UFOs, because he was a very pragmatic man. But his research changed all that for him and for everybody else, of course.
Right. Another thing that really surprised me is, while he was aware pretty early on that this subject wasn't being treated fairly, he did have people within government who were trying to help him. Like his relationship with Ruppelt and Delmer, Rear Admiral Delmer Farney.
Oh, Delmer Farney. Yeah, I used to get confused between Delmer Farney and Dewitt Forney. Okay. And I would find myself writing about one and then realizing it was the other. Yes, he had high-placed friends. His friend from Annapolis was Delmer Farney, and of course Admiral Hillenkotter, whose involvement has it kick-started all kinds of rumors about the CIA involvement. So yes, he had high-level people, and Ruppelt's input was very important to him as well.
Annapolis is very significant in my mind. I have reasons for knowing this, not believing it, knowing it. My grandfather, my mother's father, went to Annapolis. He was a genius of note, and he worked for the military, and he worked for the, he was a military engineer, and he was very highly placed in the government doing jobs at the same time that Keyhoe was. So it's possible Keyhoe knew him, okay? But what I do understand about those who went to Annapolis, they were a very tight-knit group. And those that were working in government, it was like a club, and they kept in touch with one another constantly. And they knew more than you could possibly imagine. And they passed information back and forth. I have a feeling that humanity is a funny thing. There are people in government who blindly believe or obey their superiors no matter what. And then there are those who question what the heck's going on. And because the government compartmentalizes everything, the service of knowing all that is knowable that's going on is disturbed. It's pops off. And I think those who went to Annapolis, and I say Annapolis for that reason, were keeping each other informed all the way through it. And I have a feeling that's why he was informed the way he did, and he had those connections. I think that's a very, very significant part of what he understood and what he knew and how he walked through it. the information through it. I think that's why it was. Yeah.
That's very interesting, because that's one of the gaps I couldn't fill in, because I knew from what he'd written that he had some contact with these former classmates, and then quite suddenly, when he becomes involved with NICAP, they appear, and I thought, well, there must have been some network, if you like, going on, but I could never find out any more about that. So that, if I could, I would love to have put that in there. But that's very interesting.
The only reason I know about this is my grandfather and I had a really close relationship, and he told me a lot. And he said they were the voice of truth, all these guys. And they kept it going and kept it alive. And throughout the families of these people, we all have information because of it. See what I'm saying? And we've all been very quiet. We've been very, at low level with it, because it meant, and you proved this eloquently, by people who suddenly die, under weird circumstances. That does go on. And we were all protecting ourselves from all of that. And we all knew better than to communicate it. But later in this part of my life and what's going on, I have no problem steering people in the right direction, how information flowed through everybody, that knew anything. And that it's a real line of information. It's a real line of truth coming through, no matter what the government does, know?
Well, that would probably account for why Keyhoe was, had confidence in the people that he knew at Annapolis.
Yes.
If they were as tight as you have learned, that he would be confident in saying, join us and, tell me what you know, and we'll work together. So that would make perfect sense, yes. So you should write a book about that.
I'm wondering, Linda, how long did it take you to put all this research together into a book? This must have taken years.
It took 6 years, but it's fair to say that the first 3 years the work was sporadic because I had other things going on, but also because I was having trouble finding enough documents. I found stuff online and was in contact with Gordon Law, and but then in early 21, I was given access to Professor Mike Sword's collection, which then was exclusively available just to him and to others of his acquaintance. And that opened up a whole other view, because there were altogether, I think there were 17,000 documents that came from that collection. I'd already acquired, I think, 2,000 documents from other sources to do with Ruppelt and other communications. For example, with Keyhoe and the Epperson, Marilyn Epperson and Idabel Epperson, and other correspondence between these women. And then the CIA and FBI stuff that is in NICAP's files or can be found online. So collectively, it was about 20,000 documents. And so over really 3 very intense years, I went through those. I left a lot out because the book would have been just enormous. I'd still be writing it. So I had to pare down. It wouldn't have changed the book, but it would have just given more of what was already there. So 6 years altogether, 3 years very intensively.
Wow. Yeah, it is a large book, but it reads very quickly, which is very, it was an absolute adventure story. It works on many levels, the book. So I found that really delightful. I would like to just read a little quick quote from the book where you quote Keyhoe regarding his true article, because this one I found to be very interesting regarding this true article that he wrote in his beginning to research this. He said, I had 6 months of preparation, 6 months to go from complete skepticism to slow final acceptance. I was finally convinced interplanetary craft, was the only answer. but saying so under my own byline was a lot different. Yet the evidence all added up. Still a little uneasy, I decided to go ahead. I really felt for that because, it took me about a year when I found out this was real to come to the acceptance of it. And yeah, you risk your reputation a bit.
Yes, this is true. Yeah, he was very conscious of that. Certainly, yeah.
Yeah, this must have been very difficult. But what's so interesting to me is he felt from the beginning that we're dealing with interplanetary craft. And he stuck to his guns all the way to the end. And even today, we have people who are still trying to, they're skeptics. They haven't done their research, but he did.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and of course he had the he was there at the material time, if you like. We look back at his time, and it was history. It's history to us. But I felt, I don't take any position on UFOs. I would like to think they are what Keyhoe believed them to be up to a point. But I felt I could trust him because he knew the people, he'd seen the reports, he'd done so much work, and I was never able to track down any of the contacts that he had who he doesn't name. But he was still right on the money, it seems. He spoke to the right people. He did over-dramatize things. I think he was leaning towards the interplanetary theory a little bit too hard at times, but he was always able to back things up, or I felt that he could.
I think that's perfect because there was that going on. They were back engineering things. They were creating craft, interplanetary craft that could fly like extraterrestrial craft. And it was going on as early as that. And they had people all over the world working on it, literally. Okay. And I'm sure that's what grounded and founded him in it. He thought, I don't know. I know he was digging and looking into how that could have happened. I mean, think about that. How can you develop technology from nothing, because they didn't have it before that. And that had to perplex him. And I can imagine, I sat and thought very critically about what was going through this man's mind and what he was perceiving and understanding and being told. And from my perspective now, knowing what I know that they were developing this. I know he was seeing it. I know he was being given and shown things that he couldn't even talk about because it would have meant horror for his family, In a way, he was protecting his family more than okay? But at the same time, there was this other aspect that it was back engineered. And I think at that time, they were all terrified to even say it. They were told at that time, if they did, you will die. And I think that's what caused certain things happening on the other end of this, okay? And the idea that there are extraterrestrial craft didn't really firmly come out until much, much, much later. And it's because they had a foot on the neck of all their information. They couldn't, it meant their bloody lives, to talk about it. And I think he's eloquent in his dissertation about this because he did leave little teeny clues throughout the book. If you watch carefully what he says and how he says it, and his confirmation of it, he was still saying, I believe wholeheartedly in this. That's what he thought all the way to the end. But he still had that other side of it going, well, you all need to think about this. You all need to go keep looking.
Well, you touched upon that with, you're writing about T. Townsend Brown, and who is such an interesting and enigmatic fellow. I don't know if we'll ever hear the whole story about him, but that was interesting.
Yeah, the Townsend Brown thing was that was another thing that I found interesting to begin with. How did it go from Townsend Brown to Keyhoe? And who was Townsend Brown? Well, we don't really know, do we? But certainly I highlighted the strange relationships that Townsend Brown had with New Age, Adamski type mindsets. I found that very intriguing. And but as a, it's not in the book, but after I'd written the book, in fact, it was just about to go to press, and I discovered through my family history research that somehow I'm related to Clara John, the lady who founded NICAP in her own way.
Oh, there it is. Whoop, there it is. Oh my goodness. You're explaining a lot now. I understand the connections. Okay, that's synchronicity. Period. The end. There it is. This book is pure synchronicity for you. Yes.
And I think I may also be related to Len Stringfield as well. I'm trying to pin both of them down to see what the connections are, but so that was unexpected. But certainly, Clara John, Townsend Brown, they muddied these very strange waters in the early days of NICAP. And then, of course, Keyhoe inherited frankly, the mess that was left behind. And instead of giving up and saying, this is not going to work, let's do something else, he couldn't resist it. And there he was, up to his neck in it, really.
Yeah. What really was interesting to me about your book is it highlighted how the government not that organized, or was almost in a weird panic trying to deal with this UFO subject. And there was a lot of push, pull, and a lot of confusion. And he's got people feeding him information and others blocking it. And the Air Force's reaction to the True article, I thought, was really telling.
Yes, yes, I agree. Yes, I think the most telling part of it is when you look at Blue Book, the stuff I wrote about Blue Book, and how really ineffective it was, and that along with previous projects, Sign, Saucer, and Grudge, and they clearly were designed to prevent or deny that there was anything going on. And ultimately, the Blue Book, you may recall I wrote in the book that 80% of Blue Book's time was spent on Donald Keyhoe, because he was pushing them so hard and they couldn't really push back. But they had the upper hand because they were the official voice. But especially when after Rupert left, and then you get into Quintanilla, who was perfect for Blue Book, didn't want to know, didn't want to do anything. So Rupert was a scare to them, I think. And they were glad to see the back of him, I think.
Yeah, that was a very interesting part of the book, because I always kind of looked upon Ruppelt as, not a huge benefit to this field. But to hear that he actually was very helpful, at least he turned at the end. That was another thing. I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah,
I mean, can you talk a little bit about that whole relationship and how it evolved?
Yes, Keyhoe first met Ruppelt in 1952 at the famous press conference with General Samford after the sightings over Washington. And Ruppelt admitted that he was wary of Keyhoe because he read his books in case they ever met. And he was quite tight-lipped. But then over time, after that conference, they sort of became friends, and Ruppelt seemed to be open-minded. And I think I wrote about him treading a fine line between giving Keyhoe what he wanted to know, officially giving him, not going behind the Air Force's back, but not upsetting the Air Force. And then when you look through the letters, you see that the Air Force was very upset with him. But after Rupert left the Air Force, having provided Don with many important documents, properly obtained, nothing secret, they stayed friends for a while. But I think that once Keyhoe got into NICAP, and it seems to me after the publication of NICAP's first newsletter, in which he praised Ruppelt for all his help and for his open-minded view and effectively saying, well, he really believes in this thing, was more or less what he said. I think Ruppelt got the hard word then and was told to shut up. And at that point, because if you look at the correspondence and documentation, you can see that that seemed to be the moment at which Ruppelt turned. And I think he was frightened. I think he must have been.
You're right.
Threatened. It must have been clear, made clear to him, you shut up now. Yep. And he did a complete reversal and could not be persuaded by Keyhoe to change his position in future. So I found quite a lot of documentation and correspondence on that. And it does seem to me that newsletter, the first newsletter from NICAP, was the turning point for Ruppelt. And after that, he backed off. I think he was, sounds dramatic, but I wouldn't be surprised if he was a frightened man after that.
Yeah, absolutely. I also guarantee you that Keyhoe had the biggest heads up of his entire career in that moment, because when he realized they were doing to him what they were doing, I mean, this wasn't an emotional thing or a friendship thing. This was, oh my God, I know what they're doing. You know, that's a poof moment, you know, in your head where, because it directly threatens Keyhoe as well. Okay. He became under the same gun, whether you realize it or not. He knew from that happening to him that he was now under that gun as well. And and the fact that it didn't stop him from moving forward with this. I think it dug him in deeper, you know, which is amazing. That took courage. It took. I'm not kidding you. That took real courage.
You know, he's the most famous UFO researcher on this planet.
Yeah.
You know, and being a major, you know, he's got credibility. They couldn't attack him because, like you said, Dolly, he had truth on his side. And that's what I thought was so amazing. But there was another part of the book that I think really illustrated what he was up against. And here I have it right here. Oh yeah, the Gorman case, pilot George Gorman. When he interviewed him, he felt clearly that, you know, George Gorman himself had been constrained in some way.
Yes, that seemed to be the first time that he encountered that, where he felt that the pilot had been silenced. And of course, that then was really how it went from there on. Yes, it was a taste of what was to come. I mean, I think that the Air Force, they were exceptionally wary of Don, more than anybody else, because they didn't threaten him. They never threatened him directly, but they just kept working to make him look foolish. And sometimes they achieved it, but really
sometimes I think plausible deniability, weaponization, and outright gaslighting were used by the government in a way at those moments in time that exceeds everything else. And their ability to get away with it was incredible, you know. They were exerting unbelievable absolute control over everything, and they were weaponizing knowledge at that point. Is my opinion about this. They were weaponizing against people knowing the truth, and Keyhoe was fighting that literally. You know.
Well, I wasn't clear. I never found anything clear in what I read to say that the Air Force knew any of the big secrets. I know Carl Lorenzen believed that the CIA was in it. He might, as I would put it, was using the Air Force just as a cover, and they never really found anything out. And I think that's why they perceived Keyhoe as being such a damn nuisance, because he kept saying they do know. But when you look at his private correspondence and some of his other non-private stuff, he does come round to the idea that the CIA was probably behind it. Now, of course, there is this mindset in our own time that the CIA is responsible for everything, that they have fingers in every pie, and that if anybody has worked for the CIA, they probably know what was going on, even if you were just, you know, the tea lady or the doorman. But I did feel that there was some truth probably behind that. There is another agency, and the Air Force was kind of the front, the unwitting front. But probably some people, according to what Don said, he had contacts in the Air Force who said, well, actually, this and that is going on and is being covered up.
They were used, horrifyingly used. You have to understand that the Air Force was the eyes and ears of the skies. And that all information filling in from that point, that vantage point to them was key. You know, it was imperative that they operate through the Air Force because of that. And the CIA it's always been known, at least on this side of the shore, by those of us who understand who they are and where they came from, is and I can't use the word publicly because they'll come after me for it. There are those of us who know why the CIA exists and who's operating it. And the Air Force is absolutely used. They are the eyes and ears of the skies. And you cannot deny that. And they were structured for that reason, that way. And so they are an arm of intelligence that is imperative. And that's why they went after Keyhoe every chance they got, because they were used as well to shut him up, or at least try, or to put him out. And being the eyes and ears of the skies, it would have been more apparent for them to say, no, you're wrong, than anybody else, because to do that would have exposed people at the top, and they didn't want that. This is where plausible deniability comes in. That's where that phrase comes from. And it's amazing to me that it's still in operation, literally. You know, they have other agencies now, but it's an arm of the existence of their non-disclosure. You know,
that's kind of the conclusion I ultimately came to, is that the intelligence agencies are the ones who are fully behind the cover-up, but it's absolutely at the top of the military as well. But you know what's so interesting about your book, which you illustrated so well, is that their main tool was basically ridicule. And they would bring these people on who were allegedly high credibility, like this one by Jim Danhill, PhD, president of Superior State College.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that they would, yeah.
I found it funny, the terminology of the day that you were using to describe some of the things they were saying made me laugh. Not in a good way, in a bad way, okay? Because it's like we have language now that would make that so minuscule, okay? But they were using everything of the language of the day to make him look stupid, idiotic, misinformed, blah, 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 you know? I literally used every quiver in their word palette to come up with everything they could say about him. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Another very, very interesting part of the book for me was how he felt about the whole contactee phenomenon with George Adamski and Daniel Fry and Howard Menger, which was, you know, he wasn't happy about it, was he?
By no means, no. They were constantly a problem to him, because he wanted serious investigation and work on facts and get serious people involved. But then he had to fend off, you know, the Adamskiites, as I call them, and the others who had an enormous following. So he was against the odds very much in that respect, because he couldn't stop them. I think I quoted from David Jacobs' book, the name of which just escapes me for the moment. He gives a very good description of how the contactees operated, that they said they'd had these experiences, but they were very different to those more credible experiencers, who often were very frightened by what they experienced. It was nothing nice about popping over to Venus and Saturn, you know, to speak with nice people. Don was absolutely plagued by them, absolutely.
Yeah, well, I absolutely feel for him. That must have been very hard, because he's, you know, every time people are asking, like, where are they from? All these contactees jump up and say, oh, we know the answers. And he's like, we really don't. No.
Yeah, that's why he didn't have the same appeal as the contactees, because he couldn't answer those questions. So he didn't feed into the imaginations of those who believed Adamski and so on. It just wasn't fascinating enough for them.
There wasn't enough proof from them to garner his interest in understanding or trying to use it as information, because back in those days, people didn't have the ability to come forward with information that would have nailed it for him. We didn't have the technology we have today. We didn't have the education of the people who were reporting as contactees. It was a very diverse group of people worldwide. And we had a government who was absolutely aware that they existed and were telling the masses that they're crazy people. There was a lot going on with that. They were the most oppressed group right away because they were too close to the situation, and he didn't have the benefit of knowledge from that. And as anybody with any brains back then would have shunned it, he had a clear mission toward what he was going for, and I applaud that. I really do. I wish that he had run into an experiencer who could have given him more information that he could have got anywhere else. But I don't think they were available then. I really don't.
No, that's true. Yeah, I think he just had to judge it on what was available to him, in a sense, and that was that group, and they got so much publicity and badgered him so much. And of course, that means that people who had credible experiences were reluctant to come forward.
Exactly.
And that's not changed.
Right.
So, that whole ridicule technique was very effective, wasn't it? But he did have friends like Albert Chop. Can you talk a little bit about how Albert Chop helped him get? Because wasn't he the one who helped him get documents from the Air Technical Intelligence Command?
Yes. Al Chop was. He worked for Dewey Fournay, who was pro-saucer, and worked in, you'll have to remind me where he worked, because I've forgotten a lot of the titles and places. But he was answerable to General Sanford along the line of command. And he was quite happy for Al Chop, who was Public Information Officer for the Pentagon at the time, to help Keyhoe. As long as Keyhoe asked for the right things, then they would be provided to him. And so he was part of the short-lived openness during General Sanford's time. He was skeptical, but then believed, as it were, after the Washington sightings. And he was very helpful to Keyhoe most of the time. So he was very credible to Keyhoe.
Yeah, it's so interesting because it showed how fractured, I think, our government was, because Keyhoe finally decided there were like 3 different groups, sort of subsets of behind the cover-up. That was so interesting. Group A, B, and C. Do you remember this?
Yeah. One group believed, the other didn't believe, and some sat on the fence. And somewhere along the way, they said, "Well, we don't really know." And so there was no fixed view that came through to Keyhoe from those sources. So that probably perplexed him quite a bit, I would think. In spite of having other sources who said, well, yes, this is actually happening. So he was always in a bit of limbo, I think.
Yeah, it's just so interesting. And also trying, there's the very famous Tremonton, Utah film, which now we all take for granted. And it's in the public arena, but it was not so back then. And he was trying to get information on that and had a difficult time.
He was quite frustrated by not being able to get access to that. And then when the Air Force, in fact, put out its own film, or the retired officers put out their own film, which showed it in public cinemas. So that was an unexpected development there. But that typified the the problems that Keyhoe and others had, they would have something which ought to have been examined and allegedly was, and was then denied. And he came up against this all the time.
So interesting. But yeah, he definitely had a friend with Albert Chop, Al Chop. Because here's a quote from Chop. This is so interesting to me. This is in the book. We in the Air Force recognize Major Keyhoe as a responsible, accurate reporter. His long association and cooperation with the Air Force in our study of unidentified flying objects qualifies him as a leading civilian authority on this investigation. So that was a step forward for sure.
Oh yeah, Keyhoe was delighted to. That was a letter that Al Chop sent to, I think it was Keyhoe's publisher, who'd asked for confirmation that Keyhoe was quoting from properly acquired sources. So that was a tremendous boost for him to get that glowing commendation. But of course, Chop then left the service, and that was really the end of his usefulness to Keyhoe. But he has his place in the scheme of things.
Yeah, he had another friend with Frank Edwards as well. Is that right?
Yeah, Frank Edwards. He was a broadcaster, quite well known, somewhat influential, occasionally controversial. But he helped champion Keyhoe's cause and would put it out there for him. And it was I should be able to remember this, having written the book, but it was Frank Edwards, I think I'm correct, who launched Keyhoe in a way, because he inadvertently obtained a copy of the True magazine article and publicised it. And that really then put Keyhoe right in the spotlight from there on.
Wow. Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, fighting this cover-up is no joke. He found out about that Air Force, what would I call a law, I guess, JANAP 146.
Yeah.
Which prohibits people from talking about UFOs?
Yes, I think that's because there was the other one, AFR 202 was the other one, wasn't it? Air Force Regulation 202. And between them, they restricted what pilots could report. And I think in the case of AFR 202, if I've got this correct, you were looking at a 10-year prison sentence, and you couldn't, it applied to Canadian pilots as well as American pilots. You couldn't disclose anything without risk of imprisonment. And when Keyhoe found out about that, he was unimpressed, to say the least. And he would always put those documents out to say, look what's happening. This is the kind of gagging that's going on. So they were very important to him.
Also, I thought that was very interesting is when APRO, the Aerial Phenomena Research Organization, came into existence, and they were very supportive of him. Well, at the same time, there was a little bit of clashing.
Yeah,
he would never
I heard about that when I first started researching Keyhoe, and the word at the time was, the only version of events I heard was that they fell out because they disagreed about the little men, otherwise known as little green men, because Powell was open to the idea and Keyhoe was closed. But when I dug into that, it seemed to be a case of one incident that had so annoyed Coral, who I've learned from, I won't say who, but I've learned from other sources who knew her personally, that she could be very vindictive. And if you upset her, then God help you. And she would turn against you forevermore. And that seemed to have been Keyhoe's experience. She was wonderful to him until he inadvertently, I believe, insulted her over the issue of the Carl Jung membership of APRO and his status there. And that I felt that was the real reason why she turned on him. And it was quite sudden. And it was very vicious. I mean, her own letters that I found, left absolutely no room for doubt. She hated him with a passion.
When did she state the reason for the hate? Did she expound on it?
She didn't specify, but she skirted around the issue. She mentioned, obliquely mentioned the Jung incident in one of her letters. But when you put it all together, it seemed to me you had the pieces of that jigsaw, that it wasn't the little men, because they had corresponded on them before, and they were happy to accept each other's views. And Coral, she adored Keyhoe. I mean, she went completely over the top in her praise of him.
Yeah, how could you not?
She did, when she talked about something about his work being greater than all the something or other of the Roman Empire. I can't remember what the phrase was.
So I'm curious, is it possible that she did not want Keyhoe to have anything to do with Jung because she totally 100% did not believe? I'm serious about this, okay? What he was expanding or saying or doing, all of his work, whatever that was invalid in her mind in some way, and that she considered him a dangerous voice in all of this.
No, I don't get that impression at all. No, I think
no, not at all.
I think they were on the same side of the fence as far as the reality of what people were seeing. I think it was purely a personal grudge that she held against him, because she felt, understandably, I think, humiliated by what seemed to be a triumph for her by getting Jung on her side, and then Jung rejected her. And Keyhoe, as I illustrate in the book, did it many times. He would unwittingly put his foot in it and not realize how he might be insulting or annoying or inflaming someone. And he wouldn't have known that side of Coral, because from what I've learned about her from other sources, she could be very charming and she would be very supportive until you upset her. And then her has no fury, you know?
I think, Carl, this is my personal opinion, and this is an opinion that I got from ET. Okay, this is how it was explained to me.
Is a contactee, by the way.
Yes. Yeah. That he was a literal double agent in all of this. He was a misinformation and disinformation person.
Carl Jung, you're talking about?
Yes, that he would say things at first, and then he was slick as a whip, or slick as a slide. I guess that's the best way to put it. You don't understand what he was capable of doing and perpetrating. And I think that she understood it. You couldn't put anything past this woman. I know who you're talking about. And he said something to disavow her, literally to shut her up, because she may have been getting too close to something as well. And poor Keyhoe was in the middle of it, between the two of them. That's what I was told. That's what I was informed.
Well, it was interesting because you did mention that Carl Jung ultimately, he wrote the book UFOs: A Modern Myth, Seen in Our Skies. In reality, he told, if I remember this correctly in your book, he told Keyhoe that actually, I do think you're right. These are interplanetary vehicles.
Yeah, I think that might have been when he spoke to, that came from the book written about Lindbergh by, I can't remember the author's name, and his research found that Carl did say to Lindbergh that he believed the stuff that Keyhoe was writing, and that there really was something to his claims. And I think I made the point that, well, if that's what he really believed, then he was not being fair to Coral and Keyhoe.
Yeah, that's what a misinformation and a disinformation person does. They get your confidence, they find out what you believe, and they'll play with you to get any information from you they can, because they're going to turn it and twist it another way. And that's exactly what he did. And it's sad to me that happened. And women are, I'm sorry, when you're intuitive, you're intuitive. And I think that he did something that set her off, and she went, nope, not playing with you anymore. And I would not have blamed her one bit for it if she walked into that. This happens to me. I run into this all the time in this quote unquote ufology thing. I run into people all the time like this. And it's a minefield. And what you're explaining, even through the book and writing about him, what the minefield was that he was walking through. It was like bombs were going off all around him all the time, information bombs, you know?
Well, I was not happy with Carl Jung's book because I felt like, he was misrepresenting.
Very much so.
This, I hate that word, phenomenon.
That's what made him slick in my mind. He was very good at what he did. Very good.
So another super interesting aspect of your book was Donald Keyhoe's TV appearances. Like on the Betty White show, I think, was that the first? But there was one, he did several TV appearances.
He did several, yeah. I don't think Betty White was the first. I'm not sure, but he was, he would get on TV whenever he could. I wasn't able to find a copy of the Betty White show. I assume it's been deleted long ago. But always very keen to get on TV. He figured out that if you one appearance on TV, I think he described as worth, 1,000 books or something. He found it to be very productive and helpful. So he was keen for TV very much.
Yeah, it didn't always go that well, though. Like when he was up against Donald Menzel, and they gave him, 20 minutes, and he gets 7?
Oh, yeah, that would be the Armstrong Circle appearance. Yes, it was. It was the Armstrong Circle, I think, is the one we're talking about. And yeah, he had to negotiate with the production team to get more time, and they wouldn't give it to him because the Air Force was leaning on them. And in the end, the Air Force did a completely put-up job, and left nothing for Donald, really.
It's infuriating because I think Donald Menzel knew absolutely that this was a true thing. I mean, we know this because the research by Stanton Friedman on Donald Menzel shows that he absolutely was, on the wrong side here, while knowing that this was a real phenomenon, giving ridiculous astronomical explanations for all this. And wasn't there one TV show where they actually cut him off during mid-speech?
That was the Armstrong Circle, yes. They faded him down. It turned out he didn't have anything wonderful to say, but because he began by saying, and now I'm going to reveal something that has never been told before, something like that, they thought, oh my God.
That scared the heck out of him, didn't it?
It was a program, so they had to, they had no choice but to fade him out. But that was then received very badly by the public because they thought it was censorship. And that actually did a favor for Keyhoe, because a lot of people believe the Air Force in that program. They believe their story because they spend a lot of time ridiculing contactee stories, which played into their agenda. Yeah. But so many were outraged by that fading out that he actually helped his cause a little bit, so it wasn't a complete disaster.
Yeah, they still do that today, by the way. Contactees are at the bottom of anybody's list, government-wise, military, all of that. That's why they're not included in congressional hearings. They won't touch us with a 10-foot pole. They don't want to hear from us. That's disconcerting, and it's probably going to continue because it doesn't fit the narrative of where they're going with this. And it will never fit their narrative. That's sad, but true.
I think, Don was open to, he was not closed-minded about contactees, but it was that he needed them to come up with something to show that this contact had happened. And people like Adamski were just not doing that. And they were hoping to bring the subject into disrepute. But he always said, if somebody comes forward with something that actually shows this has happened, then he will be, I think he would have loved for that to have happened. But because of the contamination of the subject.
Right. I have a burning question in my mind. I'm not trying to interrupt you, but I have a burning question. In 1952, the government perpetrated Valiant Thor. Somebody did in that group. And I guarantee you he was around then and he had to have heard that.
Oh, yeah. You mentioned that in the book.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. If I'd heard that then, I would have lost my mind and know that was complete BS. Okay. Yes. And I think that's what I think that might have been a strategic move on the military industrial complex to get two things out of one,
Yeah.
Two birds with one shot. And that was to totally perpetrate the insanity of contactees with a lie. Okay. And try to make it look real. And if he's watching this and hearing that, he's probably thinking to himself back then, who do I believe? What do I believe? There's nothing real going on here that I can quote unquote see, that bothers me a lot. Just saying that the government was so embedded in what they were doing. I mean, I can't illustrate to you understanding what you've written in this book about what he went through, that they were, what's the word I'm looking for? They were literally had their sights on him the whole way through it. And I am sure they put people on him like you wouldn't believe, and were constantly coming up with changing his narrative or trying to change his narrative every chance they got. I mean, he probably, it's amazing that he made it through all of this with cohesive and understanding of what he was talking about,
Yeah. One thing I touched on in the book, I didn't go too deep into it, was the issue of Leon Davidson, who his view was that the government was in effect throwing out smoke screens. And the contactees were being used. Now, I didn't expand. I would love to have expanded on that, but there was so much else that had to go in the book. And you may have read Mirage Men by.
Oh yeah. I know what you're talking about.
Pilkington, Mark Pilkington, and he goes into quite a lot of detail about Davidson and other perhaps not so well-known figures, and there seems to be. I would not rule out Davidson's theory in the context of Keyhoe's time at that moment. I think it was just another possibility among so many. And because Keyhoe was already convinced there was something going on, I don't think he wanted to get involved in Davidson's theory and Davidson's approach. But it's certainly worth thinking about. And when you look at Keyhoe's story, I wondered as I was working through it, well, maybe Davidson's onto something here. Not perhaps in every case, but it did seem to have some rationality, I think.
I agree, 100%.
Well, I definitely have sympathy for Keyhoe dealing with all these contactees, but at the same time, something is inside these objects. And the whole UFO field was very reluctant to talk about humanoids at all until the Betty and Barney Hill case and some of these other, the Socorro case, and these cases started surfacing. And even then, Keyhoe was still reluctant to talk about humanoids. But you think ultimately he did feel like that this was a possibility? I mean,
my interpretation was that he realized somebody had to be inside these things if they were not remotely controlled. But his position on the contactees, who, for example, Adamski would meet with these people in the desert and they're wearing weird clothes and strange hairdos and so on. All this bizarre stuff that he would claim. And so immediately you start, for Keyhoe, immediately the discussion would turn to who was in these vehicles, would then kind of fall into the domain of Adamski and the others. And he just felt he had to leave that alone because it would lead him down that slippery slope. Well, if you believe there's somebody in them, why don't you believe Adamski? And it may well have led to that. So he was in caught between two places. He was trying to keep the contactees at
Yeah.
distance.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I have great sympathy for him.
And
Yeah.
trying to put aside the obvious connection that there has to be somebody controlling or in these machines. So he was in a difficult position.
Definitely. You know, there's some really wonderful little nuggets of information in your book that I wasn't even aware of. There was one where, what's this gentleman's name? Omara. I don't know his first name, but talked about how the government had over 1,000 leading scientists working on UFO projects.
Yeah, that was an interesting thing from him, I thought. Yeah,
yeah. With,
Colonel O'Mara.
Let's see, Air Force was receiving 700 sighting reports, and there were all these satellites, artificial satellites, and that's when people started to clam up because.
He would get these little bits coming out. So, of
really...
course, Colonel O'Mara was one of the thorns in his side, and he loved to have a go at him when he could. You know, he could be very, I don't like to say vindictive, but if you rattled his cage hard enough, you know, he'd really go at you, and O'Mara had done that. So he was not in his good books, really.
Yeah, and apparently General Samford got a little angry with him.
Yes,
gave him a bawling out.
That's right. Yes, and Keyhoe showed another side to his nature there, because he was delighted that O'Mara had suffered. His reputation had been damaged, and his promotion chances might be ruined. So that was a little bit mean of him there, but I think his frustration was probably feeding that reaction.
Yeah, another thing that absolutely shocked and dismayed me was his book, The Flying Saucers Are Real, based, of course, on his true article, sold like 6 million copies or something? Or no, 500,000?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, how much did he make? Almost nothing?
Yes. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that was very interesting and surprising, because there's always this idea, there always was this story that Keyhoe was very wealthy and he was making a lot of money. Now, he was wealthy before he got into saucers, but once he started writing about them, he just wasn't savvy enough to negotiate good deals with publishers, was the bottom line of it. He was so very keen to get the book out. I don't think he didn't have enough knowledge to negotiate properly.
He didn't have a manager. He needed one really bad, I think.
Yeah,
have an agent.
Yeah, so he lost out.
Preston is of the opinion that no writer makes a lot of money, except for those who know how to operate the system, as you say.
You're darn lucky if you do.
Yeah, most writers don't make any. I mean,
I also think that it is a control. I thought about this when he started bringing it up to me yesterday. It crossed my mind that this is a way that the media controls information. Okay, if something is controversial or it's too hot, they will suppress it anyway. They can't, even though we have freedom of speech, more or less, even from back then, they would suppress it by pushing an author or a writer away from the subject by making it hard for them to make any money at it, to push them into going somewhere else, and writing about what they want you to write about. It's insidious is what I think. And it's played out all over the world. I really do. Because how can that happen? We have people who make money doing all kinds of things, and you think intellectual property is worth a lot of money, especially when it involves telling truths. Okay. And for somebody to be controlling that is unbelievably incredible to me. And it's like when I say it's insidious.
His books were so successful too. And I guess the True magazine article was their most widely read article ever. It's like you would think that would be enough.
Yeah. Of course, it received a lot of flack because when you look through the FBI and CIA documents that refer to Keyhoe's work, they write about him being, basically writing nonsense and over-interpreting and dramatizing and so on.
Non-disclosure, right there. Their general rule is, period. No comment. This does not exist. You're all wrong. Period. That's how they and they know full well the opposite is true, but they have to document it that way, and they have to do it because if somebody ever got a hold of the information they have on the top, you're looking at disinformation, misinformation, and misconduct on their part. And it's a very deep well that they've dug to protect what they know. And they're not going to let it go. They're not, not at all.
Yeah, well, Keyhoe, of course, was trying to operate in that very that environment, which, of course, I just think is even worse now today than it was in his own time, because things are more difficult now in almost every respect. So I often wonder how he would have fared today.
That's a good question. I hope much better. I think maybe he would have been taken way more seriously. He would have had more chances at information. I mean, what he got was incredible. I mean, think about it. He got information that, I'm not kidding you, not anybody else could have got.
Well, due to his connections,
yeah. That was
also
crazy.
This came across in your book. I think there was a quote from Ruppelt that Donald Keyhoe could basically read minds. He was very intuitive.
Well, actually, he was insulting him with that remark. Yeah.
Oh, was he?
Yes. Ruppelt. Hynek described Ruppelt as being like a weather vane. I refer to that quite a bit in the book.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
And what Ruppelt was trying to do with that remark you refer to there, he was writing about the subject, but he admitted later that he felt it prudent to insult Keyhoe because of what the Air Force had said to him. So that was one of his insults. So that's quite discouraging. But Keyhoe seemed to take that on the chin, and didn't lose his friendship or he didn't break the friendship with Ruppelt over that. Many another man, Coral Lawrence would have, I think, but Keyhoe didn't.
Maybe he was just jealous that he was able to get that information. That it might have been a friendly, back and forth between the two of them.
Yeah.
We only have like 20 minutes left. We have 20 minutes left on the show, and I want to touch upon NICAP definitely, and how that all, because NICAP was influential, but only for a short time. I mean, this was a rocky organization from the beginning. And so can you talk a little bit about how NICAP formed and Keyhoe's role?
NICAP came about through the mysterious circumstances we touched on with Townsend Brown and Clara John, and also her friend Rose Hackett, who became NICAP's secretary under Townsend Brown. There were many doubts about Brown to begin with because he was a bit of an unknown, didn't have much money, and didn't, according to Maurice Jessup, I'm sure you're familiar with Maurice Jessup, Jessup hit the nail on the head when he said, well, Brown doesn't really know enough about the subject. He's in it to make money. So there was a big breakup in January 1957 after 3 months of Brown being in charge. And then when Keyhoe took over, he realized what a mess, financial mess had been created. And on the day that Keyhoe took over, NICAP had $1.40 in the bank. And that was it. And they had thousands of dollars of debt. And so that really set in motion the financial problems that Keyhoe was trying to counter, along with all of the other stuff, the Air Force, the press, the contactees. And so it was an ongoing battle to manage finances, keep contactees at bay, battle with the Air Force. And Keyhoe was always intensely irritated by anything that was critical of him or NICAP, and he would go to great expensive lengths to rebut it. So that didn't help NICAP at all. Membership was up and then down. And the biggest burden, in fact, according to what I found, on NICAP was the cost of their newsletters, the cost of publication and postage. was the most damaging financial burden that they had. In addition, they couldn't get tax exempt status, which had been one of the initial expected benefits they would have under Townsend and then under Keyhoe. And coincidentally, I think not, in 1970, after Keyhoe was kicked out and a suspicious character called John Acuff took over, suddenly tax exemption was granted with no argument, no explanation. They just gave it to them.
That would be the government takeover of NICAP right there. Literally. I'm not joking around about that. It would have been the government.
No, I see where you're coming from, because I know there are theories that the government and CIA or whoever actively worked from within the organization.
Yes.
But I think that their work was really just to keep undermining it and reducing its credibility, because they knew, I think, that Keyhoe would not sit back and say, this has happened and I've been threatened in this way. I think he would have made a hell of a row about it. So they managed him. They undermined him. They made sure, I think, that he was deprived of tax exemption, which was a very, very big burden. So they kind of whittled away at it and made sure it had no hope. And
well, 1970 was a big year because there were things about to start happening that they absolutely had to have control over at that point. And that Keyhoe was not going to be allowed anymore to do anything to overwrite their business of what they were up to. And I'm not joking around, because in the UFO world, if you pay attention to what goes on, and the sightings that started happening after that became significant, because now we're dealing with nuclear problems, we're dealing with war, we're dealing with certain types of war, we're dealing with nuclear power plants going up, and ET becoming very, very active. And they absolutely lost their minds, and they had to take control away from everybody at that point. 1970 is a big year. Okay. That's why I think that happened. And if you gather all the information worldwide about everything was being cited versus, and trying to separate in your mind what was industrial back engineered versus what was coming in from extraterrestrial, there was a definite presence at that point. There was a presence before, but it amped in 1970. And that's when they started locking down on everybody, because they absolutely had to control the narrative. Yeah. They were paranoid and afraid. Literally. They were spreading it throughout their ranks like crazy. They didn't understand. Well, they did, but they were afraid, literally afraid of what was about to happen.
Well, in Keyhoe's last correspondence that I was able to track down from the 1980s, he did write to the then, I think he was the head of MOFON, whose name I can't just bring to mind.
Walt Andrus, probably?
Yes, Andrus, yes. And he said in one of his letters that he had discovered what was going on behind him getting thrown out of NICAP. Now that surprised me, because to me it seemed clear it was mismanagement and personality stuff. But he said he found out something else that would be absolutely, he didn't say absolutely devastating, but something of that ilk. So it's interesting that you say what you say.
Yep.
Maybe that was what he was referring to.
He was, absolutely. I know it for a fact. I know for a fact it was.
My heart broke reading in your book about his struggles to keep NICAP together and make it an effective organization, trying to clean house, and it was filled with unsavory characters who I think did not have the effort to give truth out to the world. Quite the opposite. They were trying to cover this subject up. So poor man.
Oh yes, he was under tremendous pressure. I mean, his financial woes were constant. He was teetering on bankruptcy, and he even used his daughter's college funds to put into NICAP. He borrowed money on interest, and I think he remortgaged his house at one point. He just pitched everything he had into it, and escaped. I think to some extent was probably relieved on one level because the ordeal was over, but he still couldn't leave it alone, and was committed to exposing what he could find. And he was still getting information after he left Nightcap, as his letters to Walt Andrus tell us. So he remained active until almost the very end.
Wow.
I keep hoping, I'm not kidding you, I keep hoping that there's something that he's written somewhere that is timed to come out. And I'm just going to sit back and be very patient about it. But I got a feeling that there's information out there left from him that will surface, you know? I just got to think about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, just briefly, I will go back to the Coral Lorenzen situation. And the last friendly letters they exchanged, which were in 1958, and they both wrote to each other about their knowledge of something that was going on, that was a terrible thing, the implication being some alien thing. And they intended to work together on this, but then came the fallout, and that never happened. So whatever it was that informed both of them of what that was, one would hope it will still be out there. Maybe someone can find it. And I'd love to see it if they do.
Yeah, another very interesting part of the book was your whole coverage of the Condon Committee and what a fiasco that was.
Oh my God, yes, that's a terrible thing. Yeah, an absolute put-up job. The man in charge of that was 100% uncommitted to it. And then as later things emerged, as I discovered and wrote in the book, the whole thing was absolutely a show. And there was no commitment, no interest, and an absolute commitment to bury the thing, and to bury Keyhoe if they could. So yeah, that was very, very intense, very convoluted, and just a disgrace, really. It was a disgrace.
Well, it's really interesting to me because Keyhoe was always pushing towards getting a congressional hearing as well. And, the Condon Committee kind of ended up with Blue Book being dissolved. And then, of course, there was the Hillsdale College sightings with Hynek, eventually reversing his opinions on UFOs and coming to the side of an advocate. And,
yes, that's right, yeah.
Right, and ultimately did lead to congressional hearings. So in a way, he was vindicated. He got what he wanted. It was just...
he was vindicated in that respect, but of course the congressional, well, it wasn't really, they called it a symposium, I think, not a congressional hearing, but that also was a put-up job, as I was able to find. So they successfully thwarted him at every turn, eventually, of course, the Condon Committee was the last nail in the coffin, and that nail has never been removed, I don't think. It's still a case of if an official body makes a ruling. I compare it to the Warren Commission, for example, in the murder of John Kennedy. It smacked of that to me, where you decide what the outcome is going to be, you produce a nice report with a big name group attached to it, and people will believe that more than they will believe the less savoury explanation, because they're not comfortable with it, is my view. And I think that the Condon report was the Warren report in a different format.
He planted seeds. I'm positive that they're growing. He put information out there, whether whatever the powers that be have tried to thwart him, he still planted seeds that are growing, and they're coming to their fruition now. And I'm glad of that. I'm glad that we're able to sit here and talk about this, and I'm very glad that you wrote the book. I'm glad that it's still being discussed, It needs to be discussed. It needs to be followed more and looked into more closely, everything that he did. Because we have so much going on now that he sort of laid out a plan of understanding the entire scene all at once. He saw the forest for the trees, and he showed how he did it. And no matter how hard it was for him, no matter what he went through, he literally martyred himself for this. I do believe that when you start selling everything you own and you put everything you've got into something, that's reality in action. Okay. And he needed that to be stated. You don't throw in a sense, you don't, throwing your life away for the truth is more grounding than anything else that you could possibly know. And you have to take stock in that. You have to take stock in what this person went through. It's literally martyrdom for the truth. And I'm glad he did it. I'm glad that his words are still available to us. I'm glad that you wrote about it the way that you did. And we just need to bring this out more. We need to follow the path, because it's literally a map of what's going on now as well. Because everything that was happening to him is still occurring now. And we all have to be able to see that and open our eyes and understand that it is occurring, and try to make it stop, end it. Because we're disclosure. We are disclosure, not them. And what we know now is more important than what they're trying to propagate on us. And he's very clearly was trying to show that,
Yeah. And when I was writing the book, I did attempt to do a comparison between what he was experiencing and the kind of things that are going on now. But frankly, it was overwhelming. And things at that time, it was when the A-tip stuff and all that was about.
Right.
And it was just too much. And I thought, no, I'm going to have to just set today's stuff aside and make the point purely through Keyhoe's work itself. But I hope I've made the point. Many people have said I have, that nothing has changed. But what Keyhoe experienced is effectively what's going on now.
Exactly. We've made that point. In spades, you made that point. It's framed in gold. It's absolutely true. And I'm glad it's out there.
Wonderful. I can't say enough good things about it. It really just explains so much that was going on that I don't think people still to this day fully understand. So I hope the book gets a lot of exposure and does really well, because it's a very important book. It really is.
Yeah, I think it has its place in the history of UFO, as an American history, of course, because it was a unique time, so it's within living memory of many people still today, of course. I hoped it would bring out Keyhoe's story and bring some view, some enlightenment to that time, that unique time in which he was operating in a unique field. So he was quite a remarkable man, I think.
Yeah. I'm interested to ask you this question. I don't know if anybody's ever asked this of you. Have you thought about putting a book together of all of the evidence that he accumulated, everything that you've got? I know that you used it as research for your book, but what would be cool is to show that, put all that out there in a book, bring it.
If I had the material, because the problem I found was he would make statements about certain cases and they would get publicity and he would put them in the UFO newsletters and so on. But in terms of his actual material, it's somewhat lacking, I think. I dare say it's there if somebody, probably there's more material out there than has been preserved. And I know there's some in the NICAP files, which I referred to, but I'd have to have a lot more material.
I know somebody who might actually be able to answer that for you.
Michael Pratt.
Yes. I'm gonna get Preston. We're gonna talk to him about it and see what he comes up with. He's literally been going through every file that everybody's put, like NICAP, Arrow, all these guys.
Well, he has APRO's files have now become.
just too late for me. I will quickly mention that that 5 days before my book was due to be published, the material I used from the Mike Swords collection, which then was private, suddenly went public. Now that meant that all my EndNote references, all my internet notes, links, all had to be changed, and it was an absolute nightmare. And then I learned soon after that the APRO stuff was going on, and I thought, oh, if only I'd have had that as well. So, I mean, if you have something else that I could, have a look at, I'd be most interested in seeing that.
We're going to make the call. Literally, going to make
it. So didn't CUFOS, the Center for UFO Studies, inherit NICAP's files?
Yes, they did. There was I didn't put it in the book, but there was some concern that they were going to be thrown away. And allegedly somebody was found in the process of throwing them away, but then they were stopped. So I couldn't verify that for sure. So I didn't. Every reference I've used, I've always tried to get at least 2 confirmations for everything I've used in the book, and I couldn't find a second confirmation for that.
Oh my God!
CUFOS got them, and so Richard Hall, who was the very important assistant director of NICAP for a while, he was satisfied. I thought, well, if it satisfies Richard Hall, then it will probably satisfy anyone, because he was such a meticulous person and such a vital asset. Mm.
Yeah, he was a good guy. I think one of the few good people.
His work is a pleasure to read, because it's so beautifully written and very clear. No waste of words. All there for the readers to enjoy. Quite good.
So do you think Keyhoe's ouster from NICAP was kind of the final straw? He's like, you know what? I've done what I could. Because at some point, he was getting elderly.
Well, exactly. I mean, he stayed with NICAP for a while after, in the background, and kept a watching brief. And the letters he wrote to Walt Andrews talk more about that. But he continued private. Now, interestingly, I know we're about to run out of time, but one of the things I mentioned in the book is that he had private records. He kept them in a strong room in his house, in the basement. And some of these files were withheld from NICAP during his time as director, and he continued to accumulate after he left NICAP. Now,
this is what I'm talking about. Yeah, you brought it up. Where are they?
Yeah, after he died, agents thought to be from the Secret Service went to his house and broke open the strong room and took the files away. Now, my feeling on that is, well, of course, among whatever else he had that might have been UFO related, they would have wanted to know who his contacts, because he kept quiet about his contacts. He gave them pseudonyms. So that I thought was very interesting. And
there's a duplicate. I'm telling you, I believe there's a duplicate to everything he had in that.
Wow.
And it's gonna surface. I got a feeling. I just got a feeling. He's not that stupid. He's a very smart man. And you don't leave one copy of anything anywhere for no reason unless you stupid. And I don't think he was that dumb.
Yeah. So well, I hope you're right. It would be fascinating. I have occasionally wondered, would anybody be able to get those files, assuming that they were not destroyed, through some official means? But that's sort of more of an American access thing, I think, than I could experience over here as a UK citizen.
Right.
But certainly something for someone to chew on, perhaps, see if they could track them down. What was taken from his strong room? It was forced open, and the marks from the crowbars and whatever they use are still there on the frame of the door in his house. So,
wow. Well, we're just about out of time. What a wonderful, wonderful book you put together. It really just proves there was a cover-up. Absolutely vindicates Donald Keyhoe. So thank you so much for writing this book. It's
absolutely
a true asset to this field, and for coming on to our show. I am just so delighted. It's been absolutely illuminating conversation, and I truly recommend that everybody check out this amazing book. What a wonderful job you did with this.
Well, thank you for your comments. I appreciate them, and thank you for inviting me. I've enjoyed speaking with you both very much.
So are you planning on another book?
It's nothing to do with UFOs. It's more a little hobby kind of thing. But well, depending on what may emerge in the future, perhaps I might do another UFO book.
That'd be very good. Your research ability is incredible. I think that would be apropos, you know, especially if dive into it. Yeah. Keep going.
If I had reference material, then I would be very interested. Certainly. Yeah.
Very cool.
We'll see.
Well, thank you again. An absolute honor and a delight.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Preston. Thank you, Dolly. And I'm glad we got together.
Honor. Thank you.
Take care.
Yep. All right. I'm ready. Stay with us for a few minutes after I hang up the feed. Give me a second. Thank you, everybody, for coming to us this Monday night for you in August. I think we're still going to be in August when it comes out. And we're coming to you live from the beautiful city of New Orleans in Louisiana at the United Public Radio Network at 107.7 FM and the UFO Paranormal Radio Network at 105.3 FM. We're on Facebook, we're on Roku, we're on Rumble, and we're on YouTube. We love you all. Namaste, everybody. Please have a wonderful week. And please put this book in your library. This I would consider required reading for humanity. I am not joking. Good night, everyone, and God bless. And farewell and everything else.